For a Texas mother who mysteriously disappeared before Harvey hit. Crystal McDowell's last Facebook post was, "Stay safe out there." She wrote it the day before Harvey made landfall.
It was a quiet morning, the calm before the storm, when Crystal McDowell, a woman whose life was just beginning to turn around, disappeared without a trace. This is the story of how a mother vanished into the hot, humid air before the arrival of Hurricane Harvey, and how weeks later, her lifeless body would be discovered in a remote area, revealing a shocking truth that no one could have predicted. Let's dive into the chilling details of Crystal's disappearance, the investigation that followed, and the unexpected twist that left her family and friends reeling. Crystal McDowell. A fresh start in Houston. Crystal McDowell was finally starting to rebuild her life after a tumultuous divorce. A successful realtor in the Houston area, Crystal had always been an optimist, even in the face of adversity. She had 2 children and worked tirelessly to ensure they had a bright future. Her radiant spirit was contagious, and she had a knack for making others feel at ease. Crystal's personal life was beginning to improve when she met Paul Hargrave, a jeweler who swept her off her feet. The couple quickly grew close, and Crystal was filled with hope for the future, dreaming of a life of love and stability. Though Crystal had faced heartbreak in her marriage, she had the drive and resilience to move forward. She had been renting a townhouse that was undergoing renovations and temporarily moved back in with her ex-husband, Stephen McDowell, while waiting for her new place to be ready. Although she had hoped the transition would be seamless for her and the children, she soon found that her ex-husband's lingering feelings for her made it difficult to move on. A relationship blossoms amidst personal struggles. As Crystal grew closer to Paul, tensions began to rise with Stephen. His possessiveness was increasingly difficult to ignore, and it soon became clear that he hoped for reconciliation. Despite their divorce, Stephen couldn't let go of the idea that they could rebuild their relationship. Crystal, on the other hand, was ready to start a new chapter in her life. She loved Paul and was excited about their future together. However, Stephen's jealousy and possessiveness made her uncomfortable, especially as Paul became a more permanent fixture in her life. The situation only worsened when Crystal made the bold decision to take a cruise with her kids and her uncle. At first, she had invited Stephen to join them. But after some thought, she bought Paul a ticket and disinvited Stephen. It was a clear sign that Crystal was ready to move on, and she was no longer interested in rekindling a relationship with her ex-husband. The calm before the storm. Hurricane Harvey approaches. As the storm clouds began to gather, Hurricane Harvey was on its way to Houston. The forecast was ominous, with the storm predicted to make landfall soon. Crystal's plans for the day, however, remained the same. She was determined to pick up her children from Stephen's house before the weather became too severe. On the morning of the storm, Crystal stayed over at Paul's house. Surveillance footage captured her leaving at around 7:00 a.m., getting into her black Mercedes, and heading to Stephen's house to retrieve her kids. Paul didn't think much of it at the time. He kissed Crystal goodbye and wished her a safe trip. He never imagined that this would be the last time he would see her alive. Crystal texted Paul saying, "Have an amazing day. You are so sweet," to which he replied, "I love you and I'll always support you." But after that, there was no further communication. As the day wore on and Hurricane Harvey raged across Houston, Paul's anxiety began to grow. He tried texting and calling Crystal, but she didn't respond. It was completely out of character for her. The final texts, the last words before she vanished. After Crystal's text to Paul, there was nothing. Her phone went silent, and for someone who was always quick to reply, this was highly unusual. Paul tried texting her several times, but there was no response. As the day progressed, the storm grew stronger, but Paul remained hopeful that Crystal would reach out once the weather calmed down. It wasn't until the evening that Paul's worst fears began to materialize. The storm was now at its peak, but still, no word from Crystal. By the time the hurricane hit full force, Paul was frantic. He had a sinking feeling in his gut that something was terribly wrong. Hours passed, and there was still no word from Crystal. He began to worry not just about the storm, but about Crystal's safety. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened to her. The search begins amidst the hurricane. As the storm pounded Houston, Paul and Crystal's best friend, Bron, set out to find her. They drove through the flooded streets, navigating dangerous conditions in search of Crystal. The winds howled, and the rain poured down, but they couldn't give up. The search proved fruitless, and it wasn't long before law enforcement was called in. Sheriff Brian Hawthorne of Chambers County stated that the authorities suspected something was wrong, even before the storm hit, due to the timing of the missing person report. The investigation had begun, but the search for Crystal would prove to be more complicated than anyone anticipated. The investigation. All eyes on Paul Hargrave. As police began their investigation, the focus quickly shifted to Paul. Crystal's disappearance seemed to be linked to him in some way, so the authorities questioned him thoroughly. Paul cooperated fully, providing DNA samples, cell phone records, and surveillance footage to help clear his name. He even voluntarily took a polygraph test in an effort to show he had nothing to hide. However, there were red flags. Paul claimed to have video footage that could help investigators, but when authorities attempted to obtain it, there were discrepancies. This raised suspicions, and while Paul was cooperative, his behavior and the lack of evidence to support his claims made investigators wary. The polygraph results also added to the tension. While Paul insisted he was innocent, the results from the polygraph test were inconclusive, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. A disturbing discovery. The search for Crystal. Days turned into weeks, and Crystal's whereabouts remained a mystery. Investigators scoured the area and focused on leads from Crystal's phone records. A Mercedes, identified as Crystal's, was found abandoned in a flooded parking lot of a cheap motel. The car was parked in an unusual way, and the keys were still inside. Authorities immediately suspected that the scene had been staged. This discovery only deepened the mystery surrounding Crystal's disappearance. Had she been there? If not, who had placed the car there, and why? The shocking discovery. Crystal's body found. Weeks passed, and it wasn't until the storm had subsided that the most chilling discovery was made. The Texas Rangers found Crystal's decomposing body in a remote wooded area. Despite the area being expected to be covered in floodwaters, Crystal's body had somehow been hidden. The discovery was a heartbreaking blow to her family, but it also marked the beginning of the tragic revelation of what had happened to her. Stephen McDowell's tearful confession. The investigation took a shocking turn when Crystal's ex-husband, Stephen McDowell, led authorities to the location of her body. After several interviews, Stephen tearfully confessed to strangling Crystal during an argument. He admitted that he had been consumed with jealousy and rage as he saw Crystal moving on with her new life. In an uncontrollable fit of anger, Stephen made the tragic decision to take Crystal's life. He even disclosed that the children were in the next room when the crime occurred. His tearful confession was a devastating blow to Crystal's family, who had trusted him for years. A heartbreaking conclusion. Justice for Crystal. Stephen McDowell was arrested and charged with first-degree felony murder. He was convicted and sentenced to 50 years in prison. While the justice system had taken its course, there was little solace for Crystal's family and friends. The loss of Crystal, a mother, a friend, and a woman with so much potential, was something they would never fully recover from. Crystal's best friend and family members spoke of the devastating hole left in their lives, knowing they would never hear from her again. The tragic and senseless death of Crystal McDowell serves as a haunting reminder of the dark side of human emotions and relationships. A mother, a friend, a woman with so much to offer, her life was tragically cut short by someone she trusted. Crystal's story may be over, but her memory lives on in the hearts of those who loved her. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more true crime stories. Sometimes, the truth is more chilling than we could ever imagine.